All right, last but not least is the eulogy. So this is a tricky one too, for obvious reasons, but similar to a wedding toast, the audience is composed of a lot of people that you're not going to know personally. And you've been chosen for this because of your relationship to someone, the stories you can tell, your personality. But you need to keep that in mind too, that you've been selected for this. So here are some tips for a eulogy. First of all, you want to be culturally considerate, right? In different cultures, there are different rites and traditions with funerals, memorial services. So just make sure that you know before you sit down to write the eulogy what's appropriate and what is not. For a eulogy, it's actually recommended that you write down every single word of it. And like we've talked about before, I suggest increasing the font, increasing the spacing, using bold or italics for parts that, write down all of your cues. Because often when you give a eulogy, you're in an emotional state that's not where you would want to be to give a public speech. And so having every word written down in front of you, everyone's going to forgive you for that. Okay, no one's going to say, oh, wow, they're not making up the eulogy on the fly. No one's going to say that, right? And sometimes it can be very helpful, and I wrote this a little bit lower, but to have it written out in front of you, because then you can concentrate fully on the words, and that will help you emotionally to get through the eulogy if it's an emotional, particularly emotional time for you. So with eulogies, stories are always very important because part of what we're doing is we're remembering the person when they were alive. And so you want to give examples of their livelihood and their liveliness, right? So stories are great. You'll want to talk about their virtues, right? We talked about some of those at the beginning when we mentioned our old friend Aristotle. But so virtues of the person. You can often turn vices into virtues. So for example, if someone is, the big joke is how they were a control freak in life, and it's because they wanted only the best for people, right? You say that in a eulogy. Make sure you maintain the context. So just remember where you are when you can tell jokes, you can tell funny stories for sure, but just make sure you've practiced with your tone. You just need to remember the whole time that your audience gets it. If you start crying in the middle of a eulogy, no one there is going to blame you, or they shouldn't at least, right? So don't get upset if you do. Just take a moment, right? Chances are if you start crying, half the people in there are going to start crying too, and everybody needs a moment, okay? And it's okay for you to take yours. So there's 3 eulogies that I would like for you to watch, at least in part. I know they can get kind of long. The first is Kevin Costner giving a eulogy for Whitney Houston. They were in a movie together called The Bodyguard, and he begins it just wonderfully and ends it so well. So if you skip the middle, you skip the middle, but make sure you see the end of his remarks too. The eulogy that George W. Bush gave for his father, George H.W. Bush, that's worth watching in its entirety. It's well composed. He does have emotional moments, but handles them very well. It's very touching. It's excellent. And then the eulogy that Billy Crystal gave for Robin Williams, it's not so much a eulogy as a speech of remembrance, but excellent as well. They're both comedians. And Robin Williams' death was so devastating and sudden, but Billy Crystal handles it perfectly. Of course, you probably know by now that I think the most powerful eulogy I've seen is Obama's eulogy for the Charleston Nine. So we watched part of that in class, but it's also worth an entire watch. It's long, so that's optional. But I would suggest you watch these 3 eulogies, and then and think about the different ways that people go about them, but also how they maintain their ethos, their credibility, and understanding of the context and the audience, and also the stories they choose to tell and how that helps to memorialize the person. A eulogy is about how we want to remember someone. So think about that before you write. What is it about this person I want to make sure everybody remembers? And that's what you focus on in a eulogy. So take a look at those, and then we'll wrap it up and I'll go over the assignment.